Hey guys, welcome back to Acts 2 and 42 podcast. So I'm pretty sure I know what you're thinking. Look, another episode dealing with this ridiculous work by Joesph Atwill, the Caesar's Messiah, the ridiculous claim, the unfounded, unsubstantiated claims by Joesph Atwill and his friends that Jesus Christ was somehow made up. Do we really need more? Well, look, there's a few more claims that we didn't deal with in the first two episodes that other people may say similar things or have other questions about, like his name being Jesus Christ and what that means, his similarities with other pagan gods and pagan mythology, the fact that he's another made-up mythological god. So there's a few more things here we wanted to deal with. Keep in mind, we're going to wrap it up in this part, but we definitely wanted to touch on these things and demonstrate what the problem with these are. So, without further ado, here's part 3. Welcome to Acts 2 and 42.
Efforts to understand these connections led me to an incredible discovery. Christianity had been invented by a little-known family of Roman Caesars, the Flavians, and they left us documents to prove it.
Except when you're interviewed by Vice and you're asked if they left documents to prove it, you avoid the question twice.
I mean, I think that if he had so much information, so many documents, there would have been reference to at least one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, don't just say, well, I seen all this mounting evidence, so many contradictions. I ain't gonna tell you about none of them, but there's a whole lot here.
Yeah. Right.
All this information, these words and those words, so I'll just say, hey,
there's words.
Right. These are books.
Right.
Yeah. Like, oh, good job, guy.
Yeah.
Can I get something, though, other than you just saying, I saw a whole lot that didn't make sense or that contradicted.
Right.
But then it's like, then it has the whole, then, they left proof, and he just shows an
image of some scroll.
Yeah, image of something like.
I couldn't read that.
I'm sitting there, okay, about to translate it.
Yeah. It goes, no, another dead end.
Yeah. And then it's, show the beach.
Right.
More books. We need more books.
So yeah. Some we already talked about. No actual documents. So Josephus' account proves the gospel's fake. There's no fact that said Josephus wrote the same thing that's in the gospels.
Mm-hmm. He'd have been better off getting someone else to do the video and using him as the reference point. Because right now he's using himself. Because at least there would have been some reference.
He could have been the expert that the narrator's quoting.
Yeah, but instead,
that's what I thought. So here's the example. I want to get that for why Josephus was the same as the Gospels. It was basically copied. Okay. Mm-hmm. Jesus says to his followers, "Follow me, and you'll fish for men, or I'll make you fishermen of men." In the war, a Roman general says to his troops, "Don't be afraid. Follow me." And I'm guessing he's quoting Josephus. And then he sends them to the Sea of Galilee, where they sink all the Jewish fishing boats. And the Jews, trying to swim to safety, the Romans fished them with spears. So he made these soldiers fishermen of men.
Good God.
Spearing men. That's what Jesus was referring to.
Oh my God.
See, he's saying Josephus is talking about that account.
Yeah,
now remember, everything that happened around that time was supposed to be...
thing?
Yeah.
He
said previously. Creatively, or what the reader's supposed to take from it is passivity. But what Josephus is basing the story on was the life of Flavian. It's just rewritten in a passive serve Rome. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's an argument, there why
fishing.
It's not exact, but that's where the phrase fishermen and men came from. So it didn't have to do with the fact these guys were fishermen and Jesus Christ wanted them to go,
he's modeling
all the men of the world.
He's modeling
murder.
Flavian.
Murder, yeah.
Yeah, a murderer.
Yeah.
But trying to make him look.
So that's
crazy,
where they parallel.
Yeah.
They're the same thing. Now later, we'll get into that, but after this,
that's crazy.
They say that they plagiarized the Old Testament. So either you plagiarize Flavian or you it's too pro-Jewish. It's too pro-Roman. It's too, wait a minute, hold on. So the Jews are basically Roman then. Like they're basically all one camp? Is this what's going like? So he's saying the prophecy is that someone from their own country would be governor of the habitable earth, which we're going to assume means the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. The governor of the habitable, all the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, who's that to a Jew?
Yeah.
King of the earth, the Messiah. Let's say it is. And now this oracle certainly denoted the government of Vespasian, who was appointed emperor in Judea. He was the emperor of Judea. So yeah, one of theirs, someone from Judea.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's making the claim. Let's go that far and say that this is what Josephus intended when he wrote, not just what Joesph Atwill saying, but this is actually what the author meant to write.
Mm-hmm.
Does that shred of evidence, that quote here, prove a conspiracy with the Flavians? Does this say that now, see, Josephus was obviously bought out? That could have been his actual belief. That could have been his interpretation on the scripture.
We see that today where the Jews are looking for a Messiah that would rule naturally, rule as a governor.
Like, Jesus couldn't have been the Messiah because he doesn't rule the earth.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
So it's not outside of not only belief, but outside of reason that someone who is more fundamental, fundamentalist, would believe that the governor, which scriptures prophesy of, would be a natural man who rules a natural kingdom, as governor, as a emperor, as a ruler.
This is what the Jews were looking for.
Yes.
Right.
And today, they're still looking for that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, a man interpreted a prophecy in a literal, more
a man that was taken prisoner.
Political sense.
That's why. See, they're saying he conceded with Rome. They're claiming that he favored with them and got down with them. His account, he was taken prisoner, and who's to say what happened? But all right, like, there's a way you can sign your name that you're signing under duress, like you're being forced to sign that. You know what I mean? There's several theories that you could have. And that's all I'm saying is that there's a plethora of ways that this could be explained, other than like what they all keep saying the same thing. That's one thing they all agree on is there's only one conclusion of all their points. Yeah. When they look at something, well, there's only one conclusion that can be drawn here. Well, there's plenty of other conclusions you can draw. I mean, that's a theory, but that doesn't mean that he was conspiring and therefore wrote the Gospels himself. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're jumping from this quote to he wrote the Gospels. Yeah. He invented the Messiah, Jesus Christ. This gets better. This gets way better than this.
And that's absolutely.
But that's why it's important to actually read the quote. And I wish for the sake of time we could read like a chapter or two to gather some context and understanding. Because like we know in the Bible, you can read a quote, you can read a line before, a line after, kind of helps. But read a couple chapters. Yeah. And really, that's like with Ezekiel, and stuff like, I'm like, all right, Ezekiel 28, anointed cherub. That's a little confusing depending on the version you read from, not to keep pushing my Satan propaganda here. But if you read like the 6 chapters surrounding that, he goes by nation, by nation, by nation.
Yeah. Saying the same thing.
Saying almost the same stuff. And he's condemning all of these nations. And then in the middle of them, he's just like, hey, you, angel from heaven. Yeah. Let me talk about a war with an angel from heaven. Even though I'm talking to an earthly king, I'm really referencing, if in the context of the book and the chapters that are written in there, that doesn't fit. So if you do the same thing, if you read chapter, and you're really gathering and understanding, okay, he's telling us about this. Okay, I see what he's saying about that. The Feast of Pentecost, I see it mentioned here. So that was going on. Okay, cool. So anyway. Proceed.
And we also have to remember that Josephus didn't believe in Christ as being the Messiah.
Oh, he made him up.
Yeah. Well, his reference to Christ.
Got you.
He didn't consider him as being the Messiah. So, of course, he wouldn't have put the prophecy on Christ.
Doesn't it?
It says a lot. If he invented Jesus as the Christ, as a figure of worship.
He was paid by Titus to write Gospels and make up stories based on his knowledge of Hebrew, that would convince people to worship a man that never existed named Jesus, wrote the story by borrowing from Titus and the Flavians and the siege. But then in his writings, he also writes about a guy named Jesus. Doesn't say anything about these wars. Doesn't say like about Vespasian. Like he writes about that, but he attributes that to the Flavians. But then in his own previously he writes, and he actually mentions this guy Jesus.
Yeah. His brother, how his brother died.
Yeah. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like I'm thinking of the guy who writes this,
Mm-hmm.
and also trying to put into context. This is the guy that's in the reason why he's writing is because he's conspiring with these people to make up a story. Well, those accounts, not that they prove one way or the other, but it doesn't seem like the same guy with the same motive or the same guy writing these had that motive.
Right.
Because then why would you write that? Man, you would have really embellished some stuff and really tied it in and sold it there too as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not just gave this indifferent mentioning of this guy named Jesus that, his brother, he had some followers and right, many wise teachings, like or whatever the quote is.
Yeah.
That's your Jesus reference? I thought you were paid on the payroll of Titus.
Yeah.
You really botched it there, Josephus. Like you really didn't sell it. And then later you account what they did. And there's no selling it here other than this ambiguous statement. It doesn't do it.
Yeah.
I began working on the study of the Gospels in the 1970s, and I look at texts in terms of how were these composed, what does understanding their structure tell you about who wrote them and why they were written. These texts were not independent Jewish texts, but they were created as literary works using classical literary models.
If we expect that this is the testimony of witnesses, we've got a major problem. We actually have 4 anonymous documents. They were not written by the named people on those documents. This is simply church tradition that the Gospels are so named according to Mark, according to Matthew. So this idea that the Gospels are reliable testimony is patent nonsense.
Why are the Gospels called Gospels? That's a critical question. The word gospel in Greek is evangelion, and it means good news of military victory.
Oops. But it doesn't.
Oops.
See, it does, but it doesn't.
Good messenger. Good news.
Aramaic or Hebrew is, I think, just evidence of their authorship. They were not written by any followers of Jesus who would have surely spoken Aramaic, and if they had been fishermen and simple folk, they would not have had the literal skills to write them anyway.
So, a couple things to point out.
Did anybody notice some of the books on the bookshelf? Was I like the only one looking at that stuff?
What do you have?
Oh, man. When I first watched it, I just kind of tuned out.
The papacy.
And was just looking at some of the books on the
the
bookshelf.
papacy is right there. He's still in Rome.
Picture arch.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think when they attack the faith, and you'll see this more, when they attack the faith, they attack Roman Catholicism. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, he did a lot of conflating right there as well, because you conflate oration with writing.
Right.
And you say, well, it couldn't be according to John because he didn't write it. So, because he didn't write it means that it wasn't his oration.
Right. Now
that it wasn't stated by him. So you're conflating two things and saying, well, you have to write it for it to be from you. That's not true.
Anyone that's...
It's like his autobiography ain't his because he didn't write it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Got you.
There may be some points you need to tweak.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, anyone that sat in a congregation, been faithful to a church, sat in a congregation for years, had the same pastor, whatever. We'll use Allendale, for example. How many of them, when Bishop starts talking, how many of them could finish his sentence for him?
Everyone.
How many of them? We hear the complaint all the time. We've heard these same testimonies every other Sunday. And anyway. So how many of them, especially if they were still together, like imagine the church, 30 years from now, and he's no longer here.
Yeah.
But there's people there that were still there under, his leadership. They know exactly what he taught.
Yep.
For the most part. That's not that far-fetched, especially when you're talking about a religious leader. especially when you're talking about the Christ, especially when you're talking about an apostle sent, hand-selected by him and sent to you. That's why they'd be so familiar with Paul's teachings or with John, or Mark or Matthew. It's the gospel according to Matthew, according to Mark, right? So I'm just using common sense and saying what we do in churches today. Why would that be so far-fetched to believe that now let's say after he's gone, he's dead.
Yeah.
Matthew's dead. But this is what he taught us day in, day out. Mm-hmm. This is the record that he told us. This is the oral tradition, which we know the Bible was all oral tradition
Acts.
for 2,000
the book of
years.
Acts wasn't written by the apostles, written by Luke. But he got it from the apostles.
Right.
So we just say, well, because the apostles didn't write it themselves, the book of Acts can't be trusted.
Right.
It's anonymous in its authorship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, we know that Luke wrote it because he stated that he wrote it, speaking to Theophilus.
Right.
And that's another thing. These books aren't being written like they're forgeries. They're actually being written to a certain people.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're purposely being written to it in some more intimate relationships, like Paul with Timothy and Titus.
Mm-hmm.
Luke writing to Theophilus about the former treaties that he made. And
this is a lot of forgery. This is probably like, forget 9/11 truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is huge. If there was a conspiracy, it would have to be of a huge magnitude.
Right. And that's that's what I just, that's what I've been thinking, this whole time. This is like a conspiracy on the grandest scale.
Mm-hmm.
Told you the boy went and got married and all that.
Yeah.
You got everybody involved.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost sad to listen to it. It's just like the craziest thing.
Yeah. For surface level, I can see where it to the viewer. Let's forget the creator, but to the viewer, it's like, oh man, that's crazy. I didn't know that. Never heard of this guy. But you also, all the things that we're referencing are not mentioned at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the skeptics of this and skeptics of the Christian faith that don't agree with this, they're probably familiar with some of the things we're familiar with.
Right.
And they're saying, no, bud.
But and that's the scary side of it, because, a lot of this stuff that you guys, you picked a book up off the shelf and and I'm just sitting here looking at the book. I'm like, man, that's a lot of writing over there. You know what I mean? The letters are small,
right?
And you kind of went straight to that thing almost. You know what I mean? Yeah, and I'm like, the average. I know I've never read that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's the scary part of the scary part of this, and I think it's what you said early on, which is, the average Christian, they don't know these things right here.
Who's going to take the pains it's going to take to go through each claim to find, because they're not giving you anywhere to start other than a name.
Nope, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say Josephus' Wars of the Jews, I'm sorry, there are 20 books.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which one?
Right.
That's like saying Antiquities of the Jews. It's in there.
Yeah.
Which volume?
Right.
Yeah.
Even something more local to reference Tertullian or, even Eusebius. Where?
There's more examples of utter vagueness.
Mm-hmm.
Dead Sea Scrolls, not telling you which one.
Oh, God.
Dating them so poorly. You're doing a terrible job at representing the information you claim to have.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible.
Yeah.
But to the common person,
it's a
they
powerhouse.
don't know that.
Yeah, right.
They don't know. It's like someone wielding a sword, and a swordsman says, "So that your first time holding that?" You don't seem to know what you're doing. Yeah. Someone having a gun, they're like, they turn it sideways or something because they've seen it on a movie. Like you don't know how to shoot, do you?
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to be familiar with guns to know someone that's never been around a gun.
Yeah.
And I speak as someone that's never really been around a gun. So, but you would know when you're more familiar with that thing. So, anyway, as far as the why Greek characters written by Aramaic speakers, I pointed that out that's a common theory, that some of the phraseology, some of the phrases used in the New Testament don't exactly make sense in Greek. They're not. I'm not a linguist. I'm not an expert, but supposedly, I use the example, this is how I understand it, that if what we call the Waffle House, if that was actually a Spanish or Mexican establishment that spoke Spanish, they wouldn't say Waffle House. It would say House of Waffles in Spanish.
Yeah.
So if I write something in Spanish and I write Waffle House in Spanish, it shows Spanish is not my first language.
Right.
Because I would have wrote House of, Casa de Waffle,
Right.
whatever that is. And that's what people that are proponents of the idea of it being Aramaic, they're saying when you read it in Greek, Greeks wouldn't have said that. Native speaking Greeks wouldn't have said that. Someone speaking Aramaic seemed to have said that, and possibly someone, either the orator or someone
from Greece
transcribing
actually wrote it.
in Greek,
yeah.
but wrote it word for word. They didn't take the idea and say, we don't have cats and dogs in Greek, so I'll just say it rained tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do that. They just wrote it verbatim what was being said.
Like it's hard for you to kick against the pricks.
Yeah. Is that one that really doesn't equate or just an idiom?
Like you have to look that up, that reference up to see what that idiom means.
Yeah. Yeah. Why it was written in Greek. We've already talked about this. The Great Commission, they were told to give it to the world. The common language of the world at that time was Greek. Why wouldn't you? So again, a lot of speculation, no supporting evidence.
A lot of the Christian literature advocates turning away from the Jewish law and obeying Roman law. Well, this fits perfectly into Roman propaganda purposes.
I mean, they really had it down pat. They have Jesus saying, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, which is basically in response to talking about money. Whose benefit would that be? It's so blatantly obvious.
The perception of Roman characters in the Gospels, they're all interpreted in a favourable light. They are pro-Roman. They do not depict the Romans as the forces of evil. They reverse that. It's the Jews who become the forces of darkness.
When did they say, don't follow Jewish law? Matter of fact, it's the Roman law we should be following. I get there's some things misinterpreted that you could try to spin it that way because, obey your leaders, obey Rome, whatever, render to Caesar, and then you take the concept of, him fulfilling the law. So you're leaving that law. No, they weren't leaving the Jewish law or the law of Moses and going to Caesar's law. They were, the law of Moses had been fulfilled by the Christ, therefore completing its purpose. And you were just to obey earthly leaders because they're given by God. That's not the same thing. And that's you. I mean, man, you don't have the Bible saying, don't do this, do that. Right? But the way they say it is like, man, everyone knows the Bible says, stop following Jewish law and start, obeying Roman law.
But according to what they're proposing, that if you follow Jesus Christ, you are obeying the Roman law.
True.
Which is absolutely crazy.
Right.
This whole thing is crazy, though.
Yeah.
Wow.
What Roman propaganda was the supposed authors writing? What about what was in the Gospels that was like so pro-Roman that it was like I said, it's almost like make Israel great again. Like, where are these Roman political? What did they say that was that great?
Well, his biggest piece of evidence was that Rome wasn't demonized. Like to simplify
therefore
his
it was
argument,
supported.
Rome wasn't demonized.
There's two different things.
The Jews were demonized.
Right.
The Jews were made to be the bad guy. Well, yeah, because the Jews moved everybody to envy against Christ. They pushed to have him killed.
They prepared
My man
for
said,
him
look,
100 years in advance.
I got a murderer here, and I got this Jesus guy.
Right.
What do you want?
Right.
The rulers moved the people to take Barsabbas.
Right.
We'll take the murderer, crucify him. So yeah, the Romans were impartial. Hey, this is your guy. What do we do with him?
Yeah.
Even to the point where he didn't want to kill him.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Jews are the bad guy because they were the bad guys.
They were the bad guys before Christ came.
The whole time they were contending with Christ.
Right.
Before he came.
Before he even.
They made themselves the bad guys.
Yeah.
By saying, no, we no longer have the fathers teach the children at home.
We have the record of the patriarchs, Dead Sea Scrolls, Testament of the patriarchs. And the history of the Sadducees, Pharisees, the Essene, all the different kind of sects or denominations of Judaism through the years, shortly after the Maccabean era, before the really, I guess, starting kind of like the temple era of the priestly order at the temple in the manner in which they did it. It wasn't just for sacrifices. Like you were saying, it was, the father doesn't teach at home. It's the priest that teaches. You have to learn it here by the priest. And from what I understand, it was an anti-messianic era. It was a response to people that were awaiting the Messiah. And it's like, no, we kind of got to get a grip on this. We'll control prophecy and scripture, and we'll make sure that, all that's interpreted for you properly.
Which explains why we go from Malachi, and they're not really being Pharisees and Sadducees. They're not being Pharisees, to Jesus comes, and all of a sudden these guys are all over the scene.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're the rulers.
And he's
they're teaching.
Spitting flames at them. Yeah, there's a reason for it. Yeah. My brother, the Elijah that was sent before me, you put his head on a silver plate.
Yeah.
I don't have anything nice to say to you. You cut his head off and put it on a silver plate. Literally. It's not a metaphor to anyone that doesn't know that.
Yeah.
No.
That's,
like I said, lazy, incomplete, and unsupported.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have anything else to.
The mystery to me begins with his very name. In Greek, Jesus means Savior and Christ means the Messiah. This didn't strike me as something you would call a young child.
These two words are already important within Judaism before Jesus Christ supposedly existed. Major biblical figures to a Jewish Greek-speaking populace would already be called Christ. Their ears would already be acclimated to accepting this title. So it isn't just a unique name of a single person that just suddenly popped up.
Further, there had never been any archaeologic evidence of Jesus Christ that had ever been discovered.
You cannot find an established and incontrovertible biography of Jesus at all. It doesn't exist. You enter a strange twilight zone of early Christian belief. What we have here is not a movement that's grown on the accretion of legends on a real flesh and blood man, but instead the development of a religious movement around the idea of a man.
Let's go in order. I try not to get too excited, but it's hard. So Jesus Christ, literally, quote, Jesus Christ is not a good name for a child. Who would name their kid Jesus Christ? What does this tell us about the people talking right now?
Yeah. They are running out of stuff to say. What else can we say?
So it's saying, what it says to me is they don't recognize the fact that Christ is not a name,
right?
But it's more so, a title.
I'm sorry, can I have some more?
Can I have some more, please, sir? Please, sir. Please, sir.
Because that is the most
ridiculous.
It's elementary. Sherlock.
Right.
This is elementary. Right. Christ was not his last name.
Right.
Woo! Running out of stuff to say.
Yeah. For those that don't know, like surnames are, I don't know where they originate from, but the type of like last names or surnames that we use today, there's a track record of kind of how we got to the naming style we have in this country. But not all countries have the same naming style.
Right.
They surely didn't. You were named like I have the way we get our father's name. Our last name tends to be our father's last name, right? So it's done a little differently now, but traditionally you get your father's last name. So they did something similar, but it would have been, if he was literally the son of Joseph, it would have been Jesus, son of Joseph.
Exactly.
Yep.
Jesus Bar or Ben was the kind of prefix or whatever.
Or even just Saul of Tarsus.
Right. Well, yeah.
We don't even know what Saul's last name was.
Right. If they either didn't have the father's last name or didn't know the father's last name, or there was more, if you would be known by your region, I'll just get to that.
Yeah.
So he was known as Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
Yep.
That would have been his proper name and what he was called.
Last name.
Or Yeshua of Nazarene, or Yeshua the Nazarene, or however it was pronounced at the time. But
Yeah.
No one was like, hey guys, you seen Jesus Christ? Can you come out and play today?
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't his
Like,
name.
where's Christ at?
Like, yeah.
Where's Christ?
Man. Like, no, his mom didn't name him that. Remember, he asked Peter, who do men say I am? Who do you say I am?
Thou art
the Christ. He
Yeah.
was declaring, I believe that you are the Messiah that God said would come.
Yeah.
Not that I think your father named you. Your father's last name was Messiah. Your father's last name was Christos. Like,
Yeah.
no.
Your father's name was Christos? I'm gonna call you Christos.
Right. Woo. Like these are blatant signs that these people shouldn't even be handling this information.
But it plays on the ignorance of the audience as well.
Yeah.
Right. Because
it depends on ignorance. Because like
Yeah.
what you were saying about last names, part of the progression or evolution of last names would be like you would be Keith of the Adams family. You know, once they started implementing last names, then it wasn't you, it wasn't Keith Adams, it's Keith of the Adams family.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
And it evolved from there. But the further back you go, we don't see last names, as we pointed out.
Yeah.
You know, so it plays on ignorance. Most people don't know that. We're so used to there being last names that we don't think about it, you know. So we say, yeah, Jesus Christ is a horrible name.
Yeah,
You know,
it's horrible.
Who names
a child that?
Messiah?
Right.
Yeah.
Savior,
that wasn't it.
Savior Messiah?
Mhm.
Like, man. Well, there's plenty of people that had the same. In the Yeshua episode we referenced when the New Testament in Greek referred to Joshua. It translated the same way as Jesus' name because that's the same name that we get his name from. One's translated, one's transliterated. Nonetheless, both spelled the same way in Greek, pronounced the same way in Greek. That was a common name
But
for
we don't
children.
have
The
that
first
same
name.
standard today. We don't say things outrageous today like we would do with this. You know, you have people whose name means glory, means warrior. You don't say, who named their child warrior?
Right. Their name means that. No one named him warrior.
Right.
They see there's multiple layers of ignorance. In just in that one statement. So then I don't know what her main Murdoch or Achari S. I don't know which one's the main one, but the render to Caesar lady. So she basically says that saying his name is this is bait to the Jews because they were already primed for that name. They knew that name, and you're basically baiting them to believe in this guy. So, and then points out, and I thought it was very ironic, David the Christ, and the irony that you don't even understand. They talk about typification, you know, and I'm like, yeah, you guys haven't actually put your heads together. All these people talking, because then you talk about basically they plagiarize in typology, and she references actual typology and the fact, like we know he came from the seed of David, the offspring of David. David was an early typification and a forefather of his, that he would be like David, a ruler, you know, not like Saul, but like David, the chosen, you know. Anyway, so there's so much there that it's just like, oh man, like religiously you messed it up. Yeah. You didn't identify the religious intent, the religious meaning.
Oh, you gotta be quicker than that.
So then there's no archaeology and there's no biography, no autobiography. He didn't write about himself.
Man, I caught that. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
What would the Gospels be?
Yeah.
There's no biography. What would the Gospels be? But we don't accept them. But you're asking for a biography written by who?
Yeah.
Who writes a
Oh man.
You want who did I don't know if I could be him and I would have wanted to see a biography written about this guy. Who would I think the author would be? Well, evidently you think it was Josephus, but you know, in a perfect world, according to your view, who should have been the author of this biography if you don't accept the Gospels? Yeah. I don't know. And then no archaeology.
And what do you mean by biography? Like, you obviously don't mean references, because we have plenty of those outside of
writing his life.
Like the entire life. You want all of it.
Yeah. We got it from Matthew the 1st chapter to Matthew the 28th chapter. We don't even need another book if you want biography. The early Christian writings was a twilight zone. Now, we've referenced several things, right? Letters. What about that is a twilight zone? I get like the reference to like a lot of people saying a lot of things. We have a lot of people on the Christian side. We have a lot of people all saying the same thing. How a twilight zone, I mean, I don't think that reference needs to be explained any further. But is that when you look at the actual, if you've never look into ante-Nicene fathers and what's that? That's the Researcher's Library of the Apostolic Fathers.
Ancient texts.
Like, these are early Christian writings. And I wouldn't even venture to say Eusebius or Tertullian because they come about 100 years later. But still, within the first 200 years, you have all this. Read some of that and see if it's just it's shrouded in mystery. 2,000 years of mystery.
Right.
And you
They
get
all
several different
talk
Christs.
about the same guy, same belief.
Yeah.
Yep.
After maybe 200 years, there might have always been schisms on certain views of certain beliefs, but the schisms start to grow a little bit later, you know. But as far as the early, like the first writings about him and the testimony of his existence, and
But see, he made it seem like not only was it a twilight zone, but that they believed in the idea of
not the existence of
exactly
the actual
and
guy. That's not
flat out
true
lie.
at all.
Yeah.
You would have to not read any of this to believe what he's saying. He has to have not read it. But again, like noticing his books, he's more of an expert on Roman Catholicism than the Christian faith.
Yep. I think he's going off of like trying to decipher the doctrine, because there's when you look at what at all the writings, there are some points where doctrinally, like they kind of differ, but they don't differ on the existence.
Right.
So you're using doctrine and the difference they may have here,
Right.
you know, and saying, well, it's a twilight zone. Well, in the actual area where we're discussing,
Right.
no, it's not.
Right.
It's unanimous.
Yeah.
Unanimous.
Yeah.
Everyone is.
Unanimity.
Yeah.
Anonymity.
Oh, okay.
It's unanimous. It's that thing.
It's there. It's solid.
It's solid.
That's probably why even Christian critics or skeptics do not argue against the existence of the man. It's not, they weren't believing in the idea of a man. There was a man. The idea of him being God may have evolved, but it wasn't based on the idea of someone. It was based on an actual person, though.
Yeah.
The actual researchers and qualified skeptics, experts to some degree in their fields, they're skeptical of the resurrection or of his godhood, not of the man walking.
Right.
And that's probably because when you look at the text for the first, 100 to 200 years, well, all right, it's pretty obvious. This guy existed. Like we said, from Jewish accounts, from Roman accounts, from Greek secular accounts, from Christian accounts, many Christian accounts. Yeah, they thought that there was a guy. They all talked about this dude.
Yeah.
So.
There are many churches in Rome, I've been to a few, where you go above into the church and there is Jesus. And you go underneath and there's a little sanctuary of Mithras. And it's basically the same figure.
The sun becomes the big focus, the most obvious reasons of planting and harvesting. The sun is then personified. So now we have a male sun god. It becomes a religion in many parts of the world. Christianity usurped a tremendous amount of sun worship. Some of us are saying that this was a sun god turned into a Jewish man. This December 25th birthday was in fact the winter solstice. This is really in fact the birth of the god of light. December 25th actually is the end of a 3-day period of when the sun stands still. The sun appears to be dying as the days become shorter, and the sun is reborn at that point.
Let's ask the question, is
Read that period where the sun
Jesus
stands
developed from pre-existing literary characters? Jesus has certain episodes in this so-called life, and each one of them can be traced to a prior representation of that time.
If you look at the elements which we found in the pagan mystery school myths, you find the story of a dying and resurrecting Son of God who's born of a virgin, has 12 disciples, turns water into wine at a wedding, it brings a new religion of love, is accused of heresy or of provocation by the authorities, is put to death, sometimes by crucifixion. And then if you want to commune with the God-man, you take bread and wine, and then you can come to eternal life. Well, all of this is, of course,
Where's
Christianity.
Right.
Oh, son.
Easter itself is long pre-Christian celebration of the resurrection of spring from the death of winter.
This is an ancient shamanic rite you'll find all over the world, that you go through a ritual death where you get reborn, but you're reborn as an awake being. So you've died just to your lower nature.
Was that worth
and woken
it
up
for
to
them to
your
film
higher
that for
nature.
him like
Yeah.
reappearing? Like,
Yeah.
So this is let's try to be concise here so we can get to it, because there's so much here that we can dig into. But this is similar to, man, I have to, my heart goes out to people that were scared watching this, or like, shooken up, because when I first watched Zeitgeist, I'm like, oh crap, this whole Jesus thing's made up. Are you serious, man? This whole time I was taking the church and all that, man, this stuff is made up. Is there even a God? Like,
Right.
and what do we find? Scratch a lie.
Oh,
Find a thief. So there's a couple problems here.
be
Did
modest.
they address Christianity? That's my first question. Did they address Christianity?
No, I don't think
Mentioned
so.
it.
They mentioned it.
Yeah.
See, they're conflating Catholicism with Christianity.
Mhm.
I don't think
Sun God
Catholicism
and
is
the
Christianity
The
at all.
images and
But-
the way
Yeah.
Christ is placed.
It's
in
like
the
all
church.
the images
Right.
were.
Yeah.
Oh,
They took Roman Catholicism, which is the diluting.
Yeah.
It's the government taking the Christian faith and commingling in it with four other pagan beliefs, including the Roman Imperial,
Yeah.
which has the Pontiff Maximus, the Pope.
Got you.
Used to be the leader, used to be the king, but then it became the religion, it became the
Mhm.
Pope. So with their own religion, but yes, the Roman gods, Saturnalia, Brumalia, and all the different festivities and events that they did, they took sun god worship, they took Christmas, Easter, they took, and we'll stop there. Those are Catholicism. Those aren't found in any Christian writings
Right.
predating Catholicism. You can actually see what Pope invented which one. Have nothing to do with the faith. They did come from pagan beliefs. That was Rome mixing the ways of the world, secular, and making a universal faith that everyone kind of get down with, because everyone wants to do these things. So let's just do it in the name of him. We'll be good. But then they said that the John the Baptist story, the 12 disciples, this story is this is there's a book called 12 Crucified Saviors or something like that.
16.
16.
Yeah.
I'm thinking disciples, 12 disciples. But there's plenty of books written by authors that suppose or claim.
She's one of them.
Yeah. That
Oh,
claim.
she is?
Yeah, she's one of them. This is like her movement is
Oh, okay.
Jesus is another copy of all the pagan gods.
Right.
Same
Oh,
story
okay.
borrowed. You want to share the problem with that?
Yeah, the problem is that it's not. Like they reference,
It's
just
not.
they bring up Horus. Well, the original story with Horus is that he was at war with, I believe, his brother, lost, was chopped up, body scattered around, and then I think it was his mother found the penis,
Mm-hmm.
buried it, and it grew.
The beanstalk.
I'm sorry.
Like, changes the giant
I'm
beanstalk.
sorry. That's
Yeah.
not
Or
Christ.
where we get
That's not the same
Yo.
story. With
monuments.
Krishna.
Yeah.
What's that?
Is that where we get
The
monuments?
phallus. Yeah.
Like the Washington Monument, they're all over the world, but they're phallic symbols.
Mhm.
They're a symbol that represent male fertility.
Yeah.
Wow.
With Krishna,
Yeah.
his story was totally different. The idea of the virgin birth, of the crucified Savior, any figure that shares that story, the story can be traced after Christ, not before Christ.
And that's what
though the
that's what I
figure may
wanted to
be
hear.
pre-Christ,
Right.
Yeah.
the
Like
story
the person,
Yeah.
Osiris and Horus.
Mhm.
There's hieroglyphs and stuff, Yeah, but not the details of the story
no,
added to
that
him.
changes.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you actually look at the story and the origin, it's different than them being this figure who was born of a virgin. I believe it is Krishna who's supposed to have been born of a virgin. Yet when you look at the actual story, the mother had like 6 children
Mhm.
before him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, hold on, now was a virgin birth or
Not much of a virgin. Yeah.
so that's like a virgin right
She
there.
was just a very virtuous woman.
She regrew her virginity.
Right.
But we don't see, we can't trace these supposed crucified saviors, their stories before Christ at all.
Mhm.
It all comes after Christ.
Mm.
So it's like reverse translation or reverse editing where you take what came before and or you take what came after and somehow try to make it that thing that came before based off the story that actually did come before. So you're trying to prove something.
Yeah.
So you take your later figures and try to make their story conform and make it look like, well, see, because the figure may have been there beforehand, therefore the story is also there beforehand. But
it's not so.
It's gymnastics.
Yeah.
You know, and most people don't know, so they take it and they don't know what to do with it.
Elisha-Elijah cycle. These are two Jewish prophets, one followed on from the other, which have many of the story elements found in Jesus. For example, there is a multiplication of food miracle, there is a raising of the dead miracle, there is a water miracle, there is ultimately an ascension to heaven miracle. Is this fulfillment, or is this simply copying of a useful theme?
You can see where they just used Old Testament characters and scriptures as a blueprint to create this new one.
A lot of the ethics of Christianity actually were around before Christianity. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is in fact from the Old Testament. It's Jesus didn't make that up.
Typology is used throughout the ancient Hebraic literature. And it's a genre that is really no longer understood or used today. But simply put, typology is using events from the past to provide form and context for subsequent ones.
What we're talking about is stereotypic. In other words, there's an idealized prototype which shows certain characteristics or performs in certain ways.
For instance, one of the things they do is they take an old story and they retell it in a new form, and they superimpose contemporary history upon old stories, and they create these multi-layered texts.
Hebraic typology connects prophets. Events from the life of one prophet are placed into the life of a subsequent prophet. And this shows that there is a divine pattern established by God connecting his prophets to one another.
The Gospels actually show how we can decipher for ourselves this hidden code or typology that was used to create the Jesus story.
At the very beginning of the Gospels, there's a primer of this typology. What the author of Matthew has done is take events from the Old Testament and place them into the life of Jesus. These events occur in the same sequence in the story of Jesus as they occur in the Old Testament.
Numerous Bible scholars had already identified the following parallels.
So I just want to point out before addressing this and before getting to wrap this up, this last section we just wrapped up, before moving on to this section about the Son of Man. So now it's the fact that Jesus Christ is a Messiah for the Jews. It's actually a strike against them that the New Testament contains typography and makes connections to Old Testament prophets. That would be messianic fulfillment, right? So why is that a strike against? I can see you saying, see, Josephus would have known the story had to be like that, instead of making it seem like, well, you just plagiarized it. This is what we call, but it's weird because you point out that they did it with Elijah and Elisha, and different prophets typified other stories later, which I gave the example, Moses, how about Adam? Jesus Christ is Moses. He's the replacement. He's the mediator, the God-man between God and man. He's the second Adam. He's Elisha. He's a connection. He's David. He's the Lamb. He's the temple. He's the, how far do we keep going? The Old Testament was a typification of him, of the Messiah. We believe it's the man Jesus of Nazareth, but that would be messianic prophecy. That's not plagiarizing.
Gives life like Elijah Bones.
He said, Am I right?
Am I right? Read it.
I'm right. It's
read it.
Yeah.
Quickly now.
So look.
To understand the rest of the Jesus story, his adult ministry, We simply need to know that the same system of parallel names, locations, and concepts occurring in the same sequence was used to connect Jesus in the Gospels to Titus in the works of Josephus. Joesph Atwill goes a step further to say that the Flavians wrote passages directly into the Gospels which show that they were the authors.
One of the most famous prophecies that Jesus makes is about the coming of someone he refers to as the Son of Man. Now, many people believe that he's talking about a second coming of himself, and many people believe that this is going to occur some point in the future. Well, the fact is, this coming of Jesus has already occurred. Jesus makes very specific prophecies as to what will happen when the Son of Man makes his visitation. He refers to 3 key events. The Galilean towns will be crushed, Jerusalem will be encircled with a wall, and the temple will be razed, leaving not one stone atop another. He also states exactly when this individual will come. He says that the Son of Man will appear before the generation that is alive and listening to Jesus' words passes away. Now, to Jews of this era, a generation is 40 years. And so the only individual that could possibly be the Son of Man that Jesus predicts is Titus Flavius. Titus Flavius did destroy the Galilean towns. He did encircle Jerusalem with a wall, and he razed the temple and left not one stone atop another. And he did this within 40 years. Josephus recorded that no matter how Titus tortured the Jews, they refused to call him Lord or God. So to circumvent this stubbornness, the Flavians wrote the Gospels, in which a Son of Man was predicted to come in the future. Titus fulfilled these prophecies and became the Son of Man. So you end up worshiping Titus without knowing it.
So, all right, from this section, the claim is made. It was written about 70 to 73 AD, which is when the events happened, that basically Josephus wrote all this after these events, after 70 AD.
Mm-hmm.
These events had already taken place, the siege of Jerusalem, all the things that, and then they write about them in a poetic, prophetic sense, post-date it, and tell people it was written 20 years earlier, or he said it, the story took place 40 years earlier. And they point out how perfect it was that a generation is 40 years. And he said it supposedly in 33 AD, and it was fulfilled in 73 AD as 40 years. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That they mapped it out. Couldn't just be that prophecy is perfect,
right.
But, and there's even speculation. I think the connection between, you guys familiar with Jesus' prophecies about the temple being destroyed, and at least remotely, at least, vaguely, but I don't know where I am on that. You know what I mean? Like there's times that I've taken a serious look at preterism, which shows that the things Jesus prophesied would come happened in 70 AD. They've happened already. Or partial preterism, and I don't know, there's millennialism, amillennialism, and different eschatologies.
No, which preterism?
It's that everything happened. What Jesus prophesied about the last days happened by Rome.
Okay, gotcha.
In 70 AD, destroying the temple. And look, a lot of it, there's a lot there. There's some issues with it though. Okay, and I don't want to focus too much on one thing. But even if that was like let's say we go full preterism, it was fulfilled then. That is a view though. Like that's a Christian view of eschatology. It doesn't prove forgery in post-dated scripture. I mean, that's your conclusion. But there are Christians that read that and say, yeah, he foretold that event.
Yeah, he prophesied.
He prophesied it, foretold it, and it happened there. What they're speculating is that because they were there for all of it, they just wrote about it and backdated it.
If it was done in 70 AD, you somehow got people, I believe it was Quadratus, who died roughly 130. So he was living not shortly after 70 AD. So you convinced people to believe in this character who you made up as though he was an actual figure who lived. Not even 100 years after his death. You convince people. That's hard to do. It's hard to convince someone to follow a great guy who did miracles and all that just 30 years ago. You know, he was alive 30 years ago.
No one saw it.
Nobody saw it.
I'll tell you about it later.
Nobody saw it. But everybody believes it, though.
And to tie it in with this is I'm going to write it about me and say that I'm the fulfilling of that what that guy said.
But you have Quadratus who stated that, you know, kind of paraphrasing, that the works of our Savior were always before us.
Yeah.
You know, and we saw them.
Right. Yeah.
He said that,
I get you now. Yeah.
He says that, you know, even those who were raised from the dead and healed from the sick were seen by the people, and some of them remain with us till this day.
Yeah. Roman forgery.
Got you.
It's really easy. It's really to play.
You mean convenient?
Yeah.
Right. Really convenient.
It's easy. It's convenient and it's easy. It's I don't have to. Roman forgery. See, and I'm done with it. But no, it's an excellent point. I'm just, you know, being facetious on how we just broad stroke everything, because anything that was written after was just made up by them, or fools that were convinced by the Romans. Like you can do that with anything you say post 73 AD.
Right.
It's either written by Romans or it was people that were convinced of the Roman forgeries. But your main point on what they witnessed.
Yeah.
That you're trying to
you got
do
people
this
who actually
are still alive.
Absolutely.
Still alive.
Yeah.
And that's
Raised
I guess
from the dead
that's what I couldn't
and healed
articulate.
Are still alive and remain with us till this day.
Right.
Yeah.
And that fact that I guess I really couldn't articulate, that the people you're trying to convince that you were the fulfilling of this prophecy, but they were alive. You're pointing out they would have been alive during that generation.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, people that were alive would have been like, if according to you, would have been like, what prophecy? He didn't exist. Like you want me to believe the story he was made up, but you're trying to prove the fulfilling of a prophecy from the time they were alive.
Right.
So they would have known he wasn't alive. They would have known. They wouldn't have been familiar with the prophecy at all. You know, and you're trying to convince it, like, all right, what, this never happened, but all of this happened?
Nobody's father, grandfather, none of that said, well, hold on. I was alive during that time.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a video. There's a video clip I'm going to add in from the other guy that debunked it, and he went through all the things Jesus did that would have caused an uproar in Israel, and he was like, but you know, you're writing to people that never knew any of it. No one witnessed it, never heard of it. You know, but then you're going to convince me that you're the fulfilling of his words. You see that there's like it's
who was the Jesus guy that the Jews killed then? Right.
They didn't know about him either. They killed him. They wrote about killing him, but they didn't know what his claims were. It seems not counterintuitive, contradictory.
Yeah.
That it's like you're trying to convince a people that never saw this man that these were the words of this man that I fulfilled. Why would it matter? I never followed him. I never knew he existed. You're telling me this guy existed and came? Oh, wow. I never saw him. But then you fulfilled what he did?
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh.
Have a good
you
day,
fulfilled
sir.
what he said? Wow, that's great. That's compelling. That's weird.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know how to articulate it.
You see where he said today the scriptures fulfilled in your ears? Yeah, that was me.
That was me. He said it about me.
Okay, yeah, right.
He said it about me. Yeah, but I don't remember him saying that. We were there. We were in the temple every day at that time. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
And then I don't think worshiping Jesus is the same as worshiping Titus. We've talked about it privately, but like, what? All right, so you made it all up. You're the actual Son of Man. You're the second coming of Christ. You're the Son of Man that they were supposed to worship, but it's like you're sitting back laughing. You're Titus, and you're sitting back laughing like, hey, they're worshiping Jesus. I'm getting all my glory.
I'm getting all the credit.
Yeah, but no, because the Caesar thing was you had to bow to him.
Yeah.
The Roman imperial religion was you worship that man.
It doesn't make sense considering, like you said, the worship. It wasn't indirect worship. From all the history we see from that point before,
right?
You literally either worship the being, the person,
right,
or the image they set up. You know,
of that person.
Yeah, it wasn't. Well,
you worship this guy in place of that guy.
Mhm.
No,
like the
and it's so
craziest thing.
obscure that none of you know that you're actually worshiping me.
Yeah, that's like the craziest thing.
Meanwhile, he
Who
wanted
in
to be
history?
worshipped.
Who in history?
Meanwhile,
they're
he
wor-
wanted to be worshipped.
Yeah, they think they're worshiping Jesus, but they're really
He's trying to get
worshiping
people
me.
to worship him and Jesus, and just in case they don't want to actually worship him, still make me feel good about myself. Like,
Crazy, man.
yeah,
You just did a whole documentary on a crazy guy. You're putting a whole
Yeah.
bunch of,
Yeah.
trust and faith in this crazy guy who thinks this way. I'm going to get a whole bunch of people to worship that guy, but they're really going to be worshiping me.
But they don't know it,
I'm
though.
the winner now.
Yeah.
They ain't know it.
They don't even know it.
Look at them worshiping him
Yeah,
And me.
and me, but it's really me.
I like to focus on the origins of religious ideas. And it turns out that they're very unifying underneath all of the divisiveness that we see on the surface. It would be extremely helpful for all of humanity to realize that there is this underlying unity. And those origins are basically nature worship, the study of the sun, the moon, the stars, planets. This is all what humanity has been looking at, of course, with great awe and reverence for thousands of years. And it's extremely important, I think, for us to get back to those roots. The destruction of the planet is also directly tied to religious ideas. This can help to restore balance to the planet in a very, very profoundly significant way.
The very survival of humanity depends on viewing history from a new perspective so that we can be clearer on the historical facts and still honor the myths that offer us the greatest wisdom.
Evangelical Christians are getting away with debunking facts as mere theories, even subjects like evolution, but they provide no evidence for their position other than to simply cite religious dogma.
this is the last clip, and which I think they kind of revealed their motive here. Acharias, the render to Caesar quote. She starts talking about how all of this was basically a distraction from the first real religion, which was nature worship. Nature worship, for those that don't know, is basically witchcraft. I do have to concede it's probably one of the oldest religions, like historically or whatever. But this is the motive. Their motive isn't just to leave it open ended, not nudging you in a direction. They're not just saying, you know what, man, there might be something to it, but I really doubt the story of this Christ guy. Doesn't look legit to me. All right, guys, let me know what you think. No, it's what we ought to be worshiping is trees. We ought to worship the sun,
Good, that's how you
even
do
though I
it.
criticized them for being sun god
You
worship.
break down what they believe. You take away their foundation.
Yeah.
And then present
Replace it.
them. Yeah.
Yep.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Right.
We have a problem right here. So many questions. So I give you nothing up front, just a whole lot of questions.
Yeah.
I break that down, and I have a solution for you.
Right. The statement was made, believe the myth that offers the greatest wisdom. Believe a myth.
Yeah. Believe
When
something that's
everyone
not
offers
true.
the greatest wisdom. As long as it offers the greatest wisdom, it's good. Well, then who determines which one is the greatest wisdom?
Yeah.
It's up for grabs
man.
because there's no truth. It's just whichever one you deem
Whatever
greater.
you want it to be.
I'm sorry. I'm going to go to bed without dinner.
So, I'm gonna bet on that one. So here's what it does. It leaves all that whole setup. Then why are we here? What is right? They're all myths.
Yeah.
Then they start promoting evolution,
Mm-hmm.
Darwinian evolution, and their argument is that Christians argue this, and there's no facts, and they just use religious dogma. I don't know how much you guys are aware of it, of what actual scientists are saying today. But it's known in the actual, I split atoms community. Not I write books about theories,
Yeah.
but I actually am the chemist, and I'm the physicist, and I'm in the lab. These guys all know for a fact, and they're okay with the fact that Darwin's theory, the Darwinian evolution,
It's bogus.
has been proven wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They accept that. They think it's a great theory. It was a good starter
Why it
of some
lasted.
thinking.
It's
Right.
been like a decade now.
Why
And it was
lasted, yeah.
ingenious to a degree.
Mhm.
The fact, of his work. They respect it highly, but they've known since the early 1950s, I think. I can't remember what the finding was, but they've known for some time that what they found disproves Darwin. So we were wrong. They're leaning more to intelligent design. from the people that do the science. Not guys even like us that just talk about stuff. And then their beef is that people don't believe Darwin because they don't believe facts.
What facts?
It's called the theory of evolution.
Mhm.
It's called a theory, and it's now a theory that's been disproven. It never was a fact, and now today it's actually a fact that is wrong.
Mhm.
And I don't say this as a Christian. I say as a guy listening to a physicist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It sounds like me, you're a bunch of theories that are disputing facts based on religious dogma. That's what it sounds like to me. I should be worshiping trees, believe in evolution, worship the trees and the sun, and don't believe all these other facts that are here. That's
I
strange.
don't get that.
Isn't that
Why
weird?
would I believe in evolution and worship the trees and sun? Why? It's created. I'm created.
Oh man.
It all came from if it all came from evolution.
Mhm.
It's all created, just
Right.
like I am. So
Right.
why worship that? Why wouldn't I be trying to go back to the origin of the Big Bang?
Right.
Or whatever.
Right.
The primordial soup.
Right. Or like Satanism and stuff. Worship yourself.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like your God.
Mhm.
I mean, if there is none, well, then
I'm going to
it.
believe
Yeah.
that this
Then
evolved
I'm what's important.
and worship it.
Selfishness.
Worship. Tree.
But
A tree.
a tree. Okay. All right. Or whatever. Creation. So
Universe.
Until you realize you have more power than these other creations. You know what I mean? I have way more power than this dog or this cat. So there's no way I'm worshiping it. It should be worshiping me. I don't know.
this honestly, his work. Like I said, I don't mean it.
He does work.
Yeah, his work,
He
as
finds
in
great
what he
shots.
wrote. What he wrote. The video that he had produced. The video he had produced by the beach in front of books.
In front of books.
With the bad hair.
It's really right. It's honestly not worth the time we gave it. What is worth the time that we gave is the fact that it could make an impression upon us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I hope, it's been evident to anyone listening, to anyone watching that maybe didn't know if they took a glance at it. Maybe they haven't seen it, but you've now saw parts of it, or at least heard, some of the theory being shared, that there's really nothing here. There's plenty of reasons, plenty of more sound reasons to have skepticism. If you want to be skeptical of his deity, if you want to be skeptical of his existence, do it. Just don't do it in the manner they did it, and don't listen to the arguments that they made, because they weren't based on any type of proper quotation, facts, understanding. Evangelism means military victory. Like they're just misusing the language, period.
Yeah. I think some of it.
Evangelize. Go destroy everyone.
Right. Just to announce that we
Yo,
won militarily.
man.
Destroy it and just, hey, we won.
I think we
That
also
is
have to
sick,
understand the
man.
time, because Charlie S. You could tell by the quality of the video. It's old, and we have more availability for the information. Which is why we're able to get the books and to actually to see what is actually written,
right?
Versus who knows what they were looking at. So I feel sorry for dude. I really feel sorry for dude, because you've been convinced of the lie first, and now it pushed you towards another lie.
Right.
Catholicism
being the first one. Right.
Yeah. But and then I don't care about your PhD. I doubt that he's had access to the information. So you're drawing a grand conclusion based off of your experience, really, because it seems like it's a lot of anecdotal,
it's
a lot of what you've seen, experienced,
what you think.
Yeah.
Opinion. Like you read something.
I was
that means
reading
this.
And you can tell because you're drawing from yourself as the authority and just looking for other people to confirm what you're saying, not looking to others as the authority.
People that confirm only in one thing you say, but disagree with the entire point of the documentary. That's strange to me.
Well, it's the enemy of my enemy. It's my friend. So
right.
even though we disagree on here, we both agree that, Christ should not be worshipped. Because that's the essence of their argument. Either just by saying he's invented or he's one of many mythical gods, your object is to remove worship from Christ.
Yeah.
Man. And what's crazy, this is probably just half of it. Like I said, tip of the iceberg stuff. Just basics. Both of the documentary of what could have been brought out. I mean, that was me trying to be brief. with all the claims that were made and all the statements that were made. But even what we shared as far as documentation on existence, on belief, on the church, on Romans, on whatever, there's so much. This is the tip of the iceberg. I just encourage everyone to check it out for themselves. So anyway, but as far as the things we referenced, I'll try to link everything in the description. Books, the Dead Sea Scrolls, or Researcher's Library, Eusebius, Tertullian, Josephus. You can look them up. You can read them for yourself. You can buy them for yourself. You can own them, which is great because when people say these things, I can go to my
handy dandy
notebook. You say what chapter now? Oh, you didn't give a chapter. Now I have to look up what you must be quoting.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, but you can check it out, read for yourself. And anyway, but if you made it, thanks for checking us out. Let us know what you think. Acts 2:42. Thank you.
Peace.
Yeah.